This podcast is made possible by Utah Humanities as part of the Utah Center of the Book's annual Utah Humanities Book Festival. We aim to highlight authors and writers that will be coming to the Utah Humanities Book Festival and beyond. My name is Case Johnston, manager for the Utah Center for the Book, and the author of the memoir Beyond the Grip of Cranial Synostosis, 2 novels, Let the Wild Grasses Grow, and Castaway. We record this podcast on historic 25th Street in Ogden, Utah, inside the Monarch Building, produced by the Banyan Collective.
I think it just speaks so much to what Torrey House is, just this passion for bringing real voices and beautiful voices and maybe underrepresented, but only because the venue just hasn't been here.
Hi, this is Case Johnston. Today on Check Your Shelves from Utah Humanities, we are talking to Karin Anderson, the novelist, the essayist, the poet, and Kirsten and Will from Torrey House Press, the publishers, co-publishers, and co-directors of Torrey House Press. I actually know them intimately because they've published my books. Will has a copy behind him there in his office. I saw him put it up. We saw. But yeah, so today what we're gonna do with this new year with 2025, as you've seen with our previous podcast with Jody and Emily, is we're gonna split the podcast into 2. The first part of the podcast is going to be about literature, about writing, about the author themselves, to talk about books, really, to talk about books in a way that books aren't being talked about, that are rarely talked about these days. And the second half of the podcast throughout the year is going to be kind of industry and partner driven. If you don't know, Utah Humanities is we do all of our work in partnerships, and one of our bigger partners, one of our core partners, and a lot of the stuff that we do across the state is Torrey House Press, and has been partners with us for more than a decade, right, Kirsten?
That's right. Long
before I was here. Well, not on the earth, but with Utah Humanities, and nobody wants to remember Utah Humanities before me anyway. That's how that we're going to roll today. But today, let's start with Karin. I'm going to read her bio. Karin, do you want to read anything today? It's up to you.
I didn't really think about it, but if something occurs to me.
Okay.
Then,
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Then I'll interrupt and read.
Yeah, absolutely. So Karin Anderson is the award-winning author of What Falls Away and Before Us Like a Land of Dreams, as well as the co-editor of the acclaimed anthology Blossom as the Cliff Rose. Anderson is a gardener, writer, mother, wanderer, and self-described heretic. She hails from the Great Basin and lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. Welcome, Karin.
Thank you.
Yeah, and welcome to Will and Kirsten, publishers at Torrey House Press.
We're so delighted.
Publishers of the most recent novels, What Falls Away, Before Us Like a Land of Dreams, and the new novel that comes out when?
August 5th. Right?
August 5th.
Things I Didn't Do.
Things I Didn't Do, which I'm looking forward to. I've not read it. I haven't read it. We have complete honesty on the podcast, but I haven't read it. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's not out yet, Case, so you're off the hook.
I know, but I have Will sent me a galley, which I shouldn't have admitted to, but it's only been like a week. Mm-hmm. And so if we can jump really into that, I just finished What Falls Away. Probably, when did I text you? A few weeks ago?
Yeah.
I'm a very, very slow reader. And the reason why I'm a slow reader is because when I actually read through an entire novel, which isn't always the truth. In this position, I actually get novels sent to me every day. My house just fills up with books. When I read through an entire novel, like What Falls Away, it's almost impossible for me to read like a really good paragraph or a really good chapter and not put the book down and think. Mm-hmm. Like I read books that way. Books that I love, I read a paragraph and I'll text Karin, right? Or I'll read a paragraph and I'll say to myself, that was so good. And I'll read it again and I'll put it back down.
Karin's books are so ripe for that. That's how Karin's books are supposed to be read.
They
Absolutely.
are. They're so rich. Mm-hmm. I think it's not only the prose, but also the content and the weaving between both, as the characters in these worlds. It took me a while to read it, and that was the reason. It was like, I'll read a paragraph, I'll read a chapter, and I'll put it down. Where did What Falls Away, the one it's been out how long now? 2 years?
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
A year and a half. It came out in August of 2023.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for
Where did What Falls Away come from? And then obviously Things I Didn't Do come from starting there.
Sometimes I have to think about just a minute here. So, the books really are a pair. They're not a sequel or a prequel. They run simultaneously through time, and they have related characters, but they're also independently written and should be read as independent, as an independent experience. When they come together, I think that's probably extra great. And that's the second book. The one that's coming out in August, Things I Didn't Do, definitely originated as a result of writing What Falls Away. I've been avoiding and skirting and flirting with writing about pretty close fiction founded on my own time and my own sort of home territory. And there are a lot of obstacles to doing that. I really did want it to be fiction. It's not autobiographical. People keep kind of responding to What Falls Away, telling me how sorry they are that this or that happened to me, and they didn't happen to me. But I wanted to write a novel that really kind of sent me back to a place that is just loaded with memory, loaded with a lot of pain, in some ways a lot of anger and resentment, and maybe the harder thing to concede or confess is also a lot of love and a lot of nostalgia. So I created a character named Cassandra Solberg, who's my age. Actually, she's my older sister's age, but would have gone to high school, would have gone through most of the experiences that my sister and I did in a very similar town. I knew that world. I wasn't. I was worried about going back to it in a certain way. I still live in Utah. I live 30 miles from my hometown. I don't go home very often, but I needed a character who'd been away much more forcefully and much more definitively, I guess, than I had. So I thought about a lot of the other girls that I grew up with in my hometown and thought about how many of them had been sent away because they became pregnant as teenagers. We were in the late 70s. We were kind of at the end of that baby scoop era, but still very much alive and still going on at the time. There were, between my sisters and me, we could name quite a few girls who had been sent away and whose stories for us ended at their disappearance. I remember also standing with my father up at the cemetery in my hometown, and my father talking about all of the families. He was a good storyteller, and he thought about people a lot. But naming all the children of different families that, for some reason or another, because they were queer or because they were apostates or because of, for whatever reason, many children, as in descendants, offspring, young adults in our town who just vanished off the planet and families didn't talk about them anymore. That conversation has always haunted me, really gotten to me. And it felt like it was time for me to write about someone who had been absent from that very intense and very geographically and culturally intense place, coming back to it with something of a fresh eye, but also with some painful memories. So Cassandra comes back after 40 years of absolute absence from her hometown and comes back to take care of her mother, who was on the downslope of dementia. And she has to at least negotiate her losses and her relationships and maybe picture a very different life than the one that she's actually led.
It's a truncated life.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about. As your editor, I hadn't really thought about that definitive change in the way that you're talking about it now. That there was a real. I mean, obviously she was gone, but such a halting of what you think a future scenario is going to be for a young person.
Yeah, she's very, very young, and she's sent away at 16, delivers at 17, returns for a few years, but then college draws her away, and family dysfunction. One of the things I really wanted to write about is loving a family that's hurt and that has probably handed you as much damage as it has goodness, and yet acknowledging those ties, acknowledging those relationships. We always hear you can't go home again. I think sometimes you can't do anything but go home again. Mm-hmm. And that the places that affect us as children and the places that create us stay in us forever, no matter how we want to jettison. And I think Cassandra wants it gone. I think she's lived a life that she just wants to leave it behind. So the return for her brings back a whole lot of fresh memory, but also allows her or causes her to discover important people in different ways, to come back with some wisdom and come back with at least a wish for love and a wish for, if not reconciliation, better understanding. So I knew when I wrote the book that novel had to end with a gathering of very real people, connected families, connected memories. And I had a very clear picture that I wanted them on the ground together. That was very clear to me. How I could get that and how I could create that was, part of the interesting writing process. But I knew very clearly that everyone in the book needed to be on the ground at the end of the novel, and understanding that let me really kind of create the trajectory of the plot.
It's one of my favorite scenes. It feels so vivid to me. The sunshine, the green grass, the mountains above. Yeah, it's really extraordinary. I love that kind of centered, or didn't center, but it was the destination.
Yeah, it really is. And something about literally just dropping to the ground and having contact with the planet and the piece of the planet that made all of these people and made something much bigger than any one story can account for.
Yeah. And I mean, no spoilers, Kirsten, but no, if you haven't read it yet, it's your fault, but you need to, you need to pick it up. One thing I found really, really intriguing within the book is once it started rolling, you have Cassandra come home, right? And she's dealing with her mom, obviously, which is very, very difficult. She's dealing with her brothers. She's missing one brother who has become a woman, and Matilda is kind of out there as this other character, right? That lives outside of all of them, but kind of within their memories at the same time, which I found really, really powerful, is because they discuss Matthew, Matilda in this way of a person that still exists in their memories, but doesn't exist in the world around them, kind of.
Right.
One thing I found really, really intriguing, though, is how Cassandra is, 90% of the time she's at home with her mom. Mm-hmm. And the outside world. So if you're not from the LDS culture and you're reading this book, I think what was really intriguing, what Karin did, is she brought in these other characters to reintroduce the culture around Cassandra, what she grew up in, what she's currently in, and what the world outside of that safe space of a home, not always safe, but safe enough space of a home, is or was for Cassandra, and is currently, what in her past and in her present.
Right.
Was there a point where, as a writer, I know that sometimes we just do things, but you're smarter than I am. So let me ask this. Was there a point where you said, I need other characters to come into the house to reflect the current society outside of Cassandra's home, and I'm going to use them to do different things? Or was it more organic? It felt organic in the writing, right. But as a writer, I know that things aren't always organic, and some people say that was amazing. You're like, oh, really? Wow, that was cool.
Yeah, this gets into a sort of touchy content for me, but also stuff I really do want to address, and I appreciate the question. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a very, very distinctively and devout Latter-day Saint town. I haven't been part of that religion for, how old am I? More than 3 decades. And because of that, maybe in some ways I feel a little bit like Cassandra in the sense of I needed to make some very definitive moves because I still live in my home state, because I still live among beloved family, Orthodox, non-Orthodox. We're kind of the whole range. It's a big, complicated family. But within my own immediate family, most of us have left the faith, with some exceptions that I admire. And, we all answer to our mother who, lives very devoutly. But it's hard to write a novel, and I'm sure there are other people in other groups who can relate to this, that includes Mormon characters and a Mormon worldview, but isn't necessarily about Mormonism. In a lot of ways, I wanted to get that right. I wanted to make sure that I had the doctrines right, that I had the kind of language right. That means sometimes for Cassandra, I made a couple of really careful decisions. One is I learned in graduate school, if you try to write a novel founded in Mormon culture, you just got this cast of thousands and you have to control it because you got cousins and you got relatives and you've got neighbors. And I mean, it's a very communal way of living. And so I did choose to bring her home to sit in her childhood home where she had to confront those memories and where she's largely isolated and restricted to that space, and let a cast of characters, almost kind of like a morality play, or almost like Scrooge in the Ghosts of Christmas Past and Present and Future, come and see her until she can sort of assemble. And that, but it let me keep control of her accumulating negotiations with memory and time, and with her first, she has a bad attitude, and probably my attitude matches hers sometimes. But to me, I wanted to also check myself in the sense of her first responses tend to be, go to the stereotype, go to the anger, go to the memory, go to the, I have phrases and, little doctrinal discourses that are so burned into my memory that they might as well be molecular. And I wanted to give her that too, even though she's tried to forget and tried to lose that. Right. So I really did need to control some way for her to be able to come back and not just be overwhelmed by a rush of memory, completely overwhelmed by anything, and get up again and flee. And that, so she almost had to be taken prisoner in her mother's house. Right. And the location of that house and the meanings and the accumulations of that house are very important to me. She does a lot of, she goes down and cleans out her mother's freezer that's been overfrosted forever and ever. She's trying to put some order into that world, but also she simply has to negotiate kind of one by one, and then in sort of a large accumulation. People that bring a lot back to her. People that bring out certain kinds of anger or certain kinds of, her own stereotypes, her own oversimplifications. So many of the characters that I bring in do present as stereotypes at the very beginning, and Cassandra has to see them through in a different way, has to enlarge and has to complicate them. Right. And that, so I'm in a certain way playing a game with that question of, stereotyping characters. Certain kinds, they need to be identifiable and distinctly identifiable to me as Mormon characters, and then they need and deserve to open up and become something more complicated. A lot of hurt people in this town, a lot of people who are trying to do their best, a lot of people who are, have committed, done terrible things to each other. Yeah. And that's not all they are. Right. Right, and that was really intriguing too when it came to all of Cassandra's siblings. Like James comes across at the beginning as just so much of their dad, just all the way through. But then there's so much, she has so much compassion for him at the end in the way he was shaped by their father, but he is not him. He has a lot of his characteristics. He carries a lot of the same types of traits that are hard for her to swallow, but then there is a compassion for James at the end, and I felt that was really, really lovely, and that was that nuance of people that I think that his character specifically gave us with this book, is that yes, he's shaped by the father, he wants to be like the father, but it's not going to be
all the bad things of the father. He's just going to be some things. But
right. I really appreciate you saying that.
There was compassion towards him in the way that he was shaped, and that wasn't his fault either. And I think that's the way that Cassandra, what we pull from Cassandra, is that it wasn't, she realizes finally this wasn't James's fault. It's not his fault. He's the way he is, and he's trying.
Yeah, we get to go through that journey, through Cassandra's journey with her. Like you said, as she's negotiating memory, and she's negotiating time, and she's negotiating stereotype, really.
Yeah.
I get accused of writing about, the patriarchy fairly often. And it's funny because I didn't realize I wrote about the patriarchy. I wrote about my experience, for a long time.
Sure.
But I think in this one also, we get that kind of chance to sort of take people one by one and sort of visit it and show up at different times. I really appreciate you noticing James, because he breaks my heart, and he's a deeply, in many ways you can argue he's been as damaged and hurt as Cassandra ever has.
Right.
And his responses, of course, have to be very different. But James comes through in remarkable ways.
Yeah.
Even in the sense of he's taking care of their mother in shockingly idiosyncratically tender ways. And he's her defender too. He really is the mom's defender.
Yeah. He will defend her for anything.
But he's the damaged son of a damaged son.
Exactly.
And that legacy is something I really did want to trace.
Yeah. It came across that I felt like I exhaled when that came at the end, when James had some compassion. Because it wouldn't have felt, it would have felt real, I guess, in a way, but that made it feel even so much richer and so much more real, that she finally realized that he's not the way he is because he chose it. That said, with Brian, every time I cried multiple times, oh my gosh, the scenes with Brian. I was just like, and he didn't come around forever. He just held out, and then comes around, and I teared up with that first really big exchange between them because of the kindness. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this guy. But the nuance between brothers and sisters and all the characters was just, and that's why it takes me so long to read a book. I'm like, oh, what was that? What was that, Jeff?
Well, and I would hope, and I'm sure you know this too. I would hope that if someone does want to commit to something I've committed a lot of my heart and time to, whatever it is, I do think that the book belongs to the reader once it's out there, and I would hope that a reader would give it that kind of time. I wrote it to reward that kind of reading.
Yeah.
And I'm committed to being that kind of writer.
Yeah.
And so it really does matter to me. And it's freaky, once a book goes away, as you know, it has its own conversations with its readers.
Yeah.
But I really wanted this book to answer to whatever commitment the reader gave to it. And I feel the same way about things I didn't do.
Let's switch to that really quickly. So, what are we doing on time for the first half, Brandon?
You're 25 in. So.
Okay.
All right, then I'll do a quick.
Sounds like a good transition into the book. I think. Well, this is not just on the podcast. I think Karin and I could talk all night.
I know. We figured that out the first time we met. So it's this, and I'm so grateful because this kind of thing makes me so nervous.
No.
It's just really nice to be among friends.
Oh yeah.
So
no, I'm one of those personalities. I can be really shy, especially around crowds.
Yeah.
But get me in front of a mic, and I don't know what
I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
It says you have FM voice.
Yeah, I guess
you
that's
do,
what it
you
is.
do.
Yeah.
So,
I'm growing the beard to match.
ASMR.
No, let's talk about the things I didn't do. I haven't had a chance to jump into it because, like I said, I devote time to books.
Right.
And when I do jump in, I'll jump in.
Well, okay, and this is easy. This is easy because I felt very connected to Cassandra. I don't feel like she's me, but I could give her a lot of the women that I love and care about and all that kind of stuff. But what happened to her, one of the reasons that Cassandra affected me so much is I have 4 children, and for whatever I've ever been or done or screwed up or longed for in my life, I just can't help but I'm a mom. And I'm a mommy type. They shook me up. They've changed everything. They've given me, the grounding that and I don't think every person with a uterus has to be a mom. It's just, I got lucky, grew up in a sort of a childbearing culture, and I just really like my kids. And so the thought of having that taken away from me, of all the other things that I think my home culture did take away from me or tried to keep from me, that was just that's just unbearable, and it made it very difficult and incredibly painful to write that book. And I didn't ever want to back off and say, "Oh, it's all okay," because it's not. But I was so. Cassandra never sees the child, never holds the child. She knows it was a boy, and that's all she knows. So things I didn't do is about the son that they took away. He grows up in eastern Utah, in Emory, Carbon counties, a little bit of time in the Tindick region. A very different place. And, we can go on about other things all the time, but place is so important to me in the novels, and I think we're created by those places. But so Ryder Mickelson grows up as the only child of much older parents. He has cousins that he loves and is profoundly connected to. It's interesting because, I had to kind of keep Cassandra still, even as a child, because of her gender and the kind of world that she grew up in. Her connection to the landscape is quite visual. Ryder's is out there. He loves horses. He grows up with boys who get in trucks. It's really interesting that how differently I could make the novel move. There's just a lot of back and forth motion and driving and horses running through this one. And it's not that, I got to move around quite a bit as a kid, and I was pretty lucky. But in this way, just the freedom to let this boy wander through these landscapes, and that his quest and his wish, and he finds out he's adopted at 7 after he's been severely injured after a fall from a pack mule. His quest, and it's a pretty Campbell type quest in a lot of ways, but is to join his family, to make himself believe that he lives among his own people. And in that sense, his quest is much more of a sort of inner, I don't know, I think maybe the fact that he does discover he's adopted makes him work his whole life to belong among the human beings and in the places that he wants to believe are natural and believe that are his.
Yeah.
And that. So the two books trace each other kind of in parallel in time. They both tap at the end. There's a clear acknowledgement of the relationship between Cassandra and Ryder, but in neither book I think it's important that I don't portray their actual meeting. So they come very close.
Right.
And they are aware of each other. And actually Cassandra has met his daughters. Things, but it just, in a lot of ways, it's a very closely related book, and yet it's not related at all, because this is about a child who was taken completely away from his parents. It also let me think a lot about motherhood, about parenthood, but there are two mothers, in some ways for a while almost competing mothers. I really like the adoptive mother here, and I had a chance to portray the kind of just rural, tough, moral country woman that I grew up admiring among cousins and relatives.
Yeah.
So it just let me put that world, move to a very different but parallel world, and follow through to the moment that Ryder has to make a real decision about complicating who he thinks he is.
Right. Well, I've heard from multiple people that they can't wait to read this one because they loved What Falls Away so much and want to see that other side of it. So thank you for writing them. Thank you for joining us, Karin. Karin's a friend and a writer, and I just convinced everybody to come to Ogden except for Will. Yeah, but with that, with ending with that, Kirsten, Will, we have Things I Didn't Do, obviously coming out this year. We have other books coming out. Though not we. Torrey House Press has other books coming out this year.
Feels like we, doesn't it?
It kind of feels like it.
It does feel like a good family.
I have a long story that I can tell all of you, but after the podcast. And first off, I'd love to answer the question and have you answer the question, with Karin's first book as a transition, what was it about that book that said, yes, this is an author that we want to publish? And then has that, do you feel the same way about how you choose your authors these days? Or has that changed? Or is it, is it something that you just fall in love with? Or is it something different now? I know that's a much larger question, but start with the most intimate, and that is Karin's books.
I love it. Well, I love Karin's books. One of the things that intrigued me so much, Karin, was just in how when we talked before us came out, while that was still kind of in process, I was so excited to explore with you kind of the intersection of culture and landscape in that book, and Before Us Like a Land of Dreams. That's what it is for me. It's a real exploration of culture and landscape. And with What Falls Away, I have to tell you, my spouse, Mark Bailey, with whom I co-founded Torrey House Press in 2010, he stepped away from daily operations in 2015, but he reads everything, and he reads actually more books than I do. I read a lot of things that never become books, or I read the same thing 3 times. Mark read What Falls Away. I think he read it in galley form, and he was just floored. I mean, he said, "This is the best thing that I've read in years."
Oh, so
it
kind.
just meant so much to him, and I love that in What Falls Away you were able to create such live characters that were so accessible to Mark and to me and to young people and old people. It's really something. I think it is that sense of compassion that you were talking about. And then Things I Didn't Do. Well, I was pretty excited to see what happened with Ryder.
I was too.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand it that he would remain absent. And it's funny because now I'll go back and read What Falls Away, and I think, okay, it really changes my rating of What Falls Away.
Wow.
And I didn't have him. He didn't exist when I was writing What Falls Away on that, but he came together very quickly after I needed to bring him to a mother who had never met him.
And a different landscape.
Yeah.
It's still within Utah. It's not that far away, but What Falls Away, the Wasatch Mountains of Utah Valley are so prominent, and the way the light and the sky are experienced by the characters are so different from Ryder's experience on the landscape in other parts of Utah, in more rural parts of Utah, that in some way feel a little more intimate to me.
It's funny. I'll say this really quickly, but I taught English at Utah Valley University for 30 years. The voices and the student. I mean, it's like you say. For a long time I didn't read books as much as I read. I've read thousands of pages of student work, and it was incredibly powerful for me. I learned how to trust the experiences of rural kids. I was a little bit worried about writing from more or less from the perspective of a boy and then a man. I thought very much of my brothers. The time I spent with my brothers, I recreated a lot of experiences that I had with my brothers in Things I Didn't Do. But I did come to know from teaching and from the kind of wandering that my family has done, region to region of Utah, very, very different, very different. And I've always been fascinated by Carbon in Emery County because it just doesn't have the same Mormon colonization. It has a very, very different kind of history. And that, so it was really a pleasure. The scene in Things I Didn't Do where Ryder is taken in the back of a truck, all kind of nestled in to the hospital in Colorado, in Mesa,
Grand Junction.
Yeah, Grand Junction. So,
Mesa County.
I took a ride a lot like that. I wasn't hurt, but I slept in the back of a truck all the way, through all that landscape, and I've ridden horses through that kind of country with my dad and my brothers. So, if I sort of just took the girl out, I could create a lot of those scenes pretty wonderfully. But I really love, the tiny places that people drive through. So full of vividness. I opened this book with Gerard Manley Hopkins' Pied Beauty, just the beauty of dapple things and how vividly Ryder sees that with his mother's artistic eye.
Yeah.
And I've loved that about Torrey House. I just love that about Torrey House. As soon as I really understood who they were, I thought, these are the people I've been waiting my whole life to write for.
Yeah.
These are the people I've been looking for.
Yeah. Torrey House is not afraid of narrative description, which is lovely, which you lose, I think. I think you lose so much of that in larger presses back east, where there's a lot of presses are scared of really delving into landscape through narrative description. And that's really is that a specific choice, Will? Well, let's ask Will.
Wow,
He's out
I love
there in
it.
the
That's
ether.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna defer to Kirsten on that one, given that she has kind of the founding philosophy.
That's what I think.
15 years.
I kind of saw Kirsten's face. I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't.
but the thing that I'll say before turning it back to her is, it's a question that we get a lot about being a regional press. At this point, we work with writers from Western New York all the way out to the, right on the sands of the Oregon coast. But all of our books, fiction and nonfiction, have a connection to the West in some way, and to whether that's to the land, to the culture, to the history, to frankly the future, particularly an environmental future. And we often get the question of, well, are these regional books, right? What Falls Away could not possibly be in some ways a more Utah book. It is steeped in this place, in culture, in the characters, in the land. And I think what we have found, and I think it's part of the brilliance of what Mark and Kirsten sort of founded the place to do, is that specificity is what makes these stories universal, right? And that we have found, I think, with What Falls Away in particular, it is, one of 2 or 3 titles that every time I go to reach for it, I never have a copy because I always have given all of mine away here at home. And, we got a beautiful email from we're a nonprofit press, so we have a board. So from our former board chair, who had given a copy of What Falls Away to a very close friend who loves books, loves literary fiction on the East Coast. And she said she wasn't sure how it was going to go, but, this is where she's from. This is a book she loves. And the response that she got was heartbreakingly beautiful. I mean, this book just resonated to the depths of this woman's soul in New England, right? And I've had that same reaction as I have shared this book with family and friends on the East Coast, as I've talked to booksellers in all 4 time zones. And I think it's a testament both to the hunger for stories that are so often overlooked and for characters that are often not given voice. And, and it's a testament to Karin's talent on the page, and just as an empathetic human. But this, this is a book that I would put it up against anything I've read recently, maybe anything I've read, period. And, in addition to it being one of the best novels that our co-founder, Mark, has read in years, it was also, local book world maven Ann Holman, who is co-owner of the King's English Bookshop with Cal Crosby. It was one of her absolute favorite books of 2023 as well. And they are not people who, if I were to try and sketch out what I understood as their taste, that Venn diagram would not overlap super much. But it speaks to so many different people. And, I was chatting with Anne just a couple weeks ago, and she had just finished Things I Didn't Do. And my only bit of nervousness is just that What Falls Away is such a hard act to follow. And to hear from Anne that, oh my God, I like this one even better. I love this one even more was thrilling, because it's also been fun to see, as we have, a small staff and a team that has some part-time folks that shift sort of on purpose as we rotate through interns or various other folks. I've now gotten to talk to a couple of people who have read only Things I Didn't Do and have not read What Falls Away, and to see that they are having just as rich of an experience. As Karin said, this is not a book and a sequel. These are 2 books, and the way she described it one of the first time she was telling me about it was that these are echo novels, that they're in a dance, they're circling each other and they never quite touch. And that's something that I have not seen done before. I think everybody goes for that moment where they do intersect. It feels like such a payoff. But in some ways, and Karin, I'd be curious to hear you talk about this. That almost feels too easy, and life is messier than that. Life is more complicated, and there's something so profound about leaving that moment where they might or do connect up out in the air and in the reader's imagination.
Well, I'll say one thing about it. I really wanted to create a boy, and again, he goes from in the novel from 4 or 5 years old to just past 40. So, there's a lot of time that, it really is kind of a Bildungsroman if we want to, get into genre and whatever professory words we want to use. But I wanted to create a character in him that was distinctive, that wasn't just the representative male or the again I'm fascinated by character, and I thought a lot about in some ways he does, because I was so hurt by what Cassandra lost. I confess I put my 2 sons into pieces almost as if he were a third son of mine, into Ryder, but also a lot of other people too. Ryder really did take on his own personality, and partly because of where he grows up, because of where he is, because of his situation, his relationship with his parents, who, again, Things I Didn't Do partly refers to, a boy who's supposed to be the salvation of all the suffering that his parents went through before he came and was supposed to fix it all in certain ways. There's a lot of tension there in the sense of what kind of responsibility is put on this kid. And I didn't want just a perfectly happy ending, but I also wanted a character who was just very distinctively himself. And he has a few really interesting, he struggles with speech. He's a good thinker, but he's much better at visual expression. He worries about his height because he's much taller than everybody else in his family. There are a lot of things about him that make him a pretty, for lack of a better word, a pretty shy kid, and a very pretty unassuming private man, I think, in certain ways. I think there's an expectation when we write any kind of character, and maybe this is part of what Ryder didn't do and doesn't want to have to do, is represent everybody who grows up where he did or is in his situation. I didn't want some universal return of our universal son. I wanted a really interesting character, and I wanted to think about what it would mean for Cassandra and Ryder eventually to be in the same place together. And I'm guessing at first encounter they would just be tongue-tied, both of them. They'd pick up and run. They both have a difficult time leaning into a deeply intimate situation, I guess, in certain ways. So for me, again, it does help me to know that I'm writing for Torrey House when I write a novel. It's very different to write one and say, wow, I hope I can place this. When I know the team that I'm going to be working with, when I know the kind of people and their agendas. The reason I said originally I wanted to be with Torrey House is because they value something pretty old-fashioned, and I think in some ways I had to go back to a very old-fashioned place as a writer, which is real interested in place, real interested in region. I don't really believe in universal because that's just stupid. There's only one story. If we're writing a universal story, and then we're supposed to be all done with it in a certain way. That attention to the distinct quality of who we are because of where we live, because of what we think is beautiful, because of what kind of ground we touch.
And yet that becomes universally accessible when it's done so beautifully as you do, Karin.
Because it's just human on the planet.
That's right. And while Torrey House Press, we're not exclusive to the West, this is where we are. And this is where, certainly I talk about a lot, this is where our marketing and editorial expertise is. And the reason that Mark and I founded it is we really thought that there were a lot of stories that we weren't hearing from the West, from people and landscapes.
And I love that word, a lot of them. You know, we're not looking for that big singular story to come, you know, that grand story to come out of the West that shows who we are. It's that many, many, many stories that
We're still waiting for the New York author to write about Utah for that story.
Yeah, right.
For the universal one, you know, the one that tells it all from, you know.
Well, I don't know if it's the universal one. It's just the
stereotypical blah.
Right. That's something that takes off
the American
in that way.
dirt of Utah, right? So we're waiting for that.
I appreciate what Catherine Weller said about things I didn't do, which is, you know, these are people who just see the landscape. They live in it. They don't have this sort of separate, awe-inspiring, you know, I'm coming out here to worship and things. I mean, writer kind of looks at tourists and pays attention to the people who are.
That's right. Catherine Weller of Weller Bookworks says Anderson's powerful command of voice rendered rural Utah itself a character. Its spare, sometimes harsh landscape lovingly described in the language of the people who inhabit it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Torrey House is and does. And I value that. And again, to have that kind of community, I'm sure every writer who listens to this will just feel that, you know, we feel it in our bones. We don't write alone. It's an incredibly solitary thing to sit and produce a novel. But if we know we're doing that among other people with similar but very diverse capacities and interests, and that is absolutely what I've found with this group. I'm so grateful for it. In many ways, I was talking to some friends who were. I don't know in these times if I would have the courage to write if I didn't know that I had that just incredible, powerful, just baseball diamond. You know, really to send that ball around.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's great. I mean, because we get beautiful books because you feel comfortable. Thanks, Karin. You know, but
Love
we do,
that.
right? We get beautiful books because you feel comfortable. That's true. I think going back to the question of not Western writers, because people think of Western writers as pew pew, right? Bang bang, right? But writers of the West, when it comes to place, and I've heard this from multiple people, is that writers of the West do not separate themselves from place. Like you were saying, place is just part of the story, not this exoticism of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitionally who we are.
Right. You know, and I've had people say, well, people read your books because Utah's not exotic in them. And you're like, well, yeah, because it's just Utah, you know, or
it's just a part of the, it's an ingredient.
And it's crucial, and it's it flows through us. It's not that we don't love it. And I think the second crime that Cassandra discovers and finally realizes, she's taken away from a landscape that she loves, that has defined her, that she's responded to, and that was taken away from her as well. And that becomes in some ways the sort of what dawns on her as the thing she has mourned that she's never even been able to name.
Yeah.
To have that connection to place and then have it removed. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a big thank you, though, to you all, because we get to read Karin's wonderful books because you make her feel comfortable.
Well, I love it. I do too. We get to read Karin's wonderful books.
Well, it sure was fun to read Case's version of Utah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. Yeah. Different perspective.
So much recognition, and yet at the same time, it's like, again, it's not
the voice.
Not one voice.
Not one voice.
It's not one book. It's not one story.
And that's what Torrey House gave it a home, I think, both of them because of that. Yeah. So this year, what do you guys want to highlight? You got notes?
I got a few because whenever anybody says what titles are you excited about, you know, coming up, I kind of go, wait,
all of them.
What's a book? I mean, you know, by the time Things I Didn't Do comes out, it will have been so long since I had my hands and eyes and heart on it, you know? And so it's like, oh yeah, I worked on that a long time ago with Karin, and yet it hasn't even hit the shelves yet. So
publishing's very strange that way.
It is. Publishing is super weird. So I never. It's always, what's a book? What's actually a book? And so I'll tell you a little bit of some of the things I'm excited about, and Will too. Will and I, we are the developmental editors at Torrey House Press. I work with on some of the books, and Will works on some of the books. Coming up pretty quick here. We have an amazing book called Bitter Creek.
Oh my gosh
By Tiao Lim Go.
I'm so excited.
It's
I got
really
to read
stunning.
this a long time ago too, and I picked it up again this week and just nearly passed out.
Yeah, it just floors you. So this is an epic poem. Tiao Lim Go, she lives in Lakewood, Colorado. She is writing about a massacre of Chinese workers that takes place in Rock Springs, Wyoming in 1885. I devoured this in one short evening. I think I called Will at 10:30, 11 at night. I just read this thing and it's so amazing. You're just not going to be able to believe it, and we have to talk about it tomorrow. And Tiao is telling this horrific story of a really grisly massacre from the point of view of so many people with so much empathy. I feel like I know more about my country than I did before after reading Tiao's book. Yeah. She writes from the point of view of the Chinese workers who end up, many of them getting killed or their houses destroyed. She writes from the point of view of the white workers who are the perpetrators here. But they also have been squeezed. They go on strike because the working conditions get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then the Chinese workers are brought in as strike breakers. Tiao is showing us the point of view of the railroad executives. It's 1885. It's kind of after the big boom, and things are contracting. They're trying to figure out how to keep afloat, keep business going. And even from some of the government folks, there is a little bit of empathy you can offer every single one of these parties, even though the victims are so clear. These people who are driven out of their homes and killed. The explosion of violence. Stunning. The pace that she writes, it's so wonderful. Sometimes we're getting a letter or even a Supreme Court, part of a Supreme Court decision. She's building and building, and then, boy, those last few pages were just rushing through. The tempo picks up, and it's
Do not let
extraordinary.
The term epic poem frighten you.
Yes, right.
This thing reads lighter and cleaner, just skips better than, much more easy and yet, again, super loaded reading than a novel. It's all the best of poetry, all the best of, but the pace and the clarity of the language, there's not a moment where you stand and say, oh my gosh, I don't read poetry.
No, it just really moves.
And it's interesting because there's been a real growing trend, particularly in the middle grade and YA market, of novels in verse, right? And so this is a style of storytelling that, has been around since before Shakespeare, where narrative is narrative, and there are just different versions of what style brings to the page, and
it's through the air. Just so for
it's
sure.
really fun for to be working with a writer like Tiao, who's bringing that into a very different place and a very different market, and to be publishing it in a year that is the 140th anniversary of the massacre itself this September.
And in a season of incredible labor unrest
for sure,
and potential violence again.
Yeah. I know we're an American story. Yeah,
it is. It's an American story, and it's an immigrant story because that's a part of the American story. We also have coming up The Wild Dark: Finding the Night Sky in the Age of Light by Craig Childs. I believe this is the fourth book we will have done with Craig. His wonderful short essay collection Virga and Bone was that 21? It was back during the plague times. Sounds when right. Center of the Book selected it as a Utah read, and that was an extraordinary experience to have. In The Wild Dark, Craig he wanted to explore the night sky, but he wanted to give us a journey. So he lives in southwestern Colorado. It's real dark there, real dark. But he wanted to see what it was like to experience change. So he starts at the Sphere in Las Vegas, for crying out loud. It is just the brightest
thing in the entire world.
The brightest thing in the entire world. And of course, because it's Craig and he's fascinated by everything, he's fascinated by the dang Sphere. The Sphere. And then he and his buddy ride their bikes north 200 miles. So every night they get out and they do their light measuring to kind of, not only with their physical eyes, but also with instrumentation to measure the glow of Las Vegas receding. And we get to go on this bike ride with them through some pretty strange country. You know, Nevada's a pretty interesting part of the Great Basin, and it's not really straightforward. Sometimes they're on roads, sometimes they're kind of route finding, and it's an adventure. He's an adventure guy. If you've read any Craig Childs, it's every book he has is some type of an adventure, and in some ways this is a quieter adventure than many of his others. But it's extraordinary, and we're really excited to have a Craig Childs book happening in 2025 because it's the 15th anniversary of the founding of Torrey House Press, and he's we're just excited to have him be in the lineup. I'm going to skip a little bit and then send off to Will. Just want to say just a quick little moment about Pyro, the quest for a beautifully elusive snake. I know. Sometimes Will just sets me up and says, "Well, Kirsten, what do you think about Snake Boy?" Which is maybe a little unkind. Dallin Kohler is a young
it's not
writer.
Unkind, it's a little cheeky.
That's much better. It's a little cheeky. Dallin Kohler sent us, it's a little cheeky to call him Snake Boy, but this guy's enthusiasm for snakes is just infectious. Now, I happen to kind of like snakes, so it came pretty easily for me.
I happen to have been having nightmares about snakes since that one episode on PBS Mystery of the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes where they trained the snake to go through the ducts. And we both love this book.
So it's nonfiction. Dallin he's a herpetologist. He's in his 20s. He's looking for this one particular kind of snake that is not particularly rare, but it's endemic to Utah, the area. And it's a pyro. It's a tricolored snake. And it's so exciting. Arizona Mountain King snake. It's super exciting to go up all these canyons and watch him uncover a rock and see if the snake is there. Whoop, is this not there? We're going to try this one. It's captivating. It's absolutely captivating because he loves these animals so much. And when he doesn't see a pyro, he's just as thrilled to see a garter snake. You know, it's just as exciting. And you're right there with him. The way he is bringing the natural world into imagination with such enthusiasm, I haven't read anything like it. It's really terrific. Will, do you want to say a little bit about In the Crosswinds?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, and I'll make us go long, and you can cut this if you have to. But I think that those three books together, right, are such a great example, and certainly with things I didn't do, of what Torrey House is, right? And the kinds of writers that we are honored and thrilled and, run through walls to get to work with. Bitter Creek is not Tiao's first book, but it is her first book with us. And it's a book that feels like it's a perfect fit for any number of reasons. And we're thrilled to be working with her. We've done 4 with Craig, who has written many, many books, not with us. But we're excited to be the place where he brings some of his passion projects. And Pyro is a nonfiction debut of a young man who is currently living in China, getting his, graduate training in herpetology. And Karin, who's a marvelous writer and has been teaching for years and writing for years, and this is our third book with her. We like to be a place where people can take their first step and a place for people to come home to. And that the 2 examples that I'm going to share is kind of one of each in those categories. So first, coming up at the the beginning of July, is a book by Eli J. Knapp called In the Crosswinds, Birds, Humans, and the Paradox of Place. This is the 3rd book that Eli has published with us, the first being The Delightful Horror of Family Birding. Eli is a bird guy to the core. He is a professor of human ecology, and he is a thinker and an explorer and a wanderer and somebody who I think has both an untamable sense of curiosity about the world. And this book is in some ways a, kind of a literary midlife crisis about how we relate to the earth itself. He early on in the pandemic, he lives in Western New York, and he was reading a book about the Seneca people whose homelands he lives on. And And that's, this is not new to him. This is a guy who has taught braiding sweetgrass for a decade, and he's, relatively steeped in sort of the duality of the fact that these lands have been colonized and that there were cultures that were here before and still are here. But there was something about this book and reading it in that moment that struck him differently. And it wasn't just that all of these places that he's known since childhood have names in another language that had been in many ways intentionally destroyed, but it's that the names of the places themselves were so much more deeply connected to the land. It wasn't just named after a general. It was, something particular about how this creek flows at a particular time of year, right? And that there was a connection just through the naming of things that he had not ever accessed in English. And being the guy that he is, he looked to birds to try and find his answer. And I think ultimately where this book lands, or where this book takes flight, if you'll pardon the pun, but Eli is a punny writer.
Eli is cool puns.
He's so fun on the page, even thinking about these kinds of existential questions, is that birds relate to exactly where they are in 1,000 different ways. And that there are some birds that will nest in the same place they are born. There are others that literally fly across multiple continents and come back to the same places. And in some cases that's snow, and in other cases it's tropical. And this sense that, as humans, we essentially have two metaphors for how we relate to the natural world. And one is through the idea of home as like somewhere that we set down roots, and it's this permanence and this digging in, and it gets really calcified. And the other is through ownership, and that neither of those feels true, and neither of those felt, particularly healthy. And he goes on a journey to find out what the alternatives might be. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful exploration. The other, which comes out in November, is an anthology called Beyond the Glittering World, an anthology of indigenous feminisms and futurisms. And it is being co-edited by three astounding Native writers, Stacey Shannon Dennett-Sosi, who we have worked with. We had the honor to publish her debut fiction collection, which continues to rack up more and more awards, The Missing Morning Star and Other Stories. Stacey lives in northern Utah, and she is Dene, and she is, as far as we have been able to find, the second ever Navajo writer and the first ever Utahn to be a finalist for the Pen America Literary Awards. She is co-editing this anthology with Kinsale Drake, whose debut poetry collection, The Sky Was Once a Dark Blanket, was just published last September. A Danette poet who is, again, just a literary sort of superstar on the rise. She is currently getting her MFA at Vanderbilt. And Darcy Little Badger, who actually has a PhD in marine biology, and is a best-selling YA author whose books Eletsoe, and its sequel that came out last year, Shayna Lende, and A Snake Falls to Earth, have all been acclaimed and great sellers. And she was the first Native author to be a Newbery medalist. And it is an honor to work with the three of them, but that is only the beginning, because the 20 writers that they have put together here are just a remarkable array of some names that you would know, some names that you would know if you are very familiar with certain parts of the writing world, and other folks for whom this will be their debut in print alongside some of their literary heroes. And we're thrilled to be working with everybody involved in that project, and can't wait to be able to bring that one to shelves this November.
We've done many anthologies over the years, including one that Karin co-edited, but we have not ever done an all fiction anthology. We've got a little poetry in there too, don't we?
Yeah, so this one's, it's about half and half fiction or it leans a little more, but fiction and poetry. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw in a little comment on Torrey House here. I have been hearing these two brag up these books with so much joy and so much enthusiasm and so much love for the authors, for the projects, for the books. And to hear this again, I think it just speaks so much to what Torrey House is. Just this passion for bringing real voices and beautiful voices and maybe underrepresented, but only because the venue just hasn't been here. In so many ways. What just being here does for, it's a little bit of a, I don't know, build the baseball diamond and they'll come play, but really it's what this attracts speaks also, I think, to how many remarkable thinkers and writers and kinds of experience just are waiting for words and waiting for language. And
absolutely, we believe that we're filling a real cultural gap here as well as a regional gap. I love that you can kind of hear the enthusiasm that Will and I have for these projects. We are really excited for forever. For instance, the very first titles I've looked at every book as a book baby. These are, and every author is a member of the family. We're making book babies together, and it takes all of us, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, and we need to we better be loving it, and we are.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful feeling to be able to just text your publisher. I mean, that cannot be overstated.
Well,
when it comes to that family
and they take
thing.
it seriously. They're not. They're not going to let you get away with junk. I mean, there's enough out there, and I'm sure you'd like to publish more. But once you're in their hands, they're going to attend to every level of editing and production. And again, something I'm so grateful for.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a direct result of the fact that we were founded as a mission-driven press, right? And that our mission is, we talk about it in a couple of ways, but our mission is located at that intersection between literary storytelling and environmental advocacy. And we talk about our work sort of amongst ourselves as we're here to publish books the world needs. We're here to champion writers that the world needs. And, Mark and Kirsten founded Torrey House Press in 2010 because there was a void. The first books came out in 2011. We got national distribution in 2012, and in 2015 converted to nonprofit status. And this is our 15th anniversary year. And for larger presses, they're able to publish thousands and thousands and thousands of books because they're hoping each one of those might be the next Hunger Games. But they're paying for it either because they were lucky enough to have published Goodnight Moon back in the day, or because they're where John Grisham publishes, or because they signed Sarah Palin's first memoir. And for us, we have the freedom to go this deep, and we have a responsibility to be as bold as we hope we are every single time we sit down to talk about acquisitions, because we have a business model that is a mix of earned income from the writing and from the books, and support from donors and philanthropy. And the freedom that we have because of that is really, really instrumental. We are not alone being the only independent publisher or the only nonprofit publisher in the world, but we are the leading literary publisher in the Intermountain West, and I think arguably the leading nonprofit environmental publisher in the Western United States. And it has only happened because there was a need. And it has only happened because there is almost an endless depth of the talent and the stories and the passion from the writers that we exist to work with and to serve.
That's right. Our donors and members are a part of the family and making it all possible. We, as Will says, that gives us the freedom to be mission driven and also the responsibility. And that's a beautiful, beautiful place to be responsible to a mission. Yeah.
Every single book is full attention, full time, full process.
Yeah, and it it means we look at success differently, right? I'm gonna sneak in two last comments on that front, because again, it's a question that we get. Sort of we're a smaller publisher. We do about 10 books a year, but the publishing industry is insanely opaque. I have not, it's bonkers town out here. I've never worked in an industry where there is less data and less sharing. And thankfully we got some through, the Simon & Schuster Random House lawsuit as they were attempting to merge and turn the Big Five into the Big Four a couple of years ago. And one of the data points that came out through that was that, 66% of books published by the top 10 publishers in the country don't sell more than 1,000 copies in their first year. And being a data nerd, it means I get to go back and look at our own numbers, and 84% of Torrey House books have crossed that thousand book threshold in terms of number of copies sold. So I would put our track record editorially against anybody, and even more than that, it means that for a book that doesn't sell what we wish it would, we've got some favorites that are super close to our hearts, where just you look at the numbers every day and you just pray for the day that they're going to go up more than they are. But for the people who are reading them, it is a life-changing experience.
That's right.
There are books out there that are getting stolen off the shelves of libraries, either because they're dangerous or because some 14-year-old doesn't want it on their library card, that they were checking it out, and that is success to us. And if the right few people read one of our books, it was worth doing. If the right thousands of people read one of our titles, because we were able to build the momentum it needed to break through, that is success of a different kind as well. But it lets us celebrate every single book, and I would hope it lets us help every author we work with to never have to worry that their book is going to be a failure, because in our eyes, even before we get to pub day, it already is a success.
Wow, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Karin, for writing these books. Thank you, Will and Kirsten, for publishing these books. Thank you for all you do for the literary community. I hope we can have you back again. That would be awesome. I think we could have gone for another 3 hours, obviously. But just a big thank you for being partners to Utah Humanities in so many wonderful ways. Thank you for publishing my books. I have to throw that out there, and thanks, Brandon, for doing your work. Yeah, all right. Thanks, Will. We'll talk soon. This is Case Johnston with Utah Humanities. This is Check Your Shelves. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.